to the Dollar Tree recently, you may have noticed these faux turf table runners. I have some fun ideas that I want to share with you that you can use in your spring and Easter DIYs. This table runner is pretty large. It measures 65 inches long and 11.8 inches wide. It has a nice flexible rubber backing and it's easy to cut through. So this is a lot of material that we can create different projects with. And it's only $5. I'm also going to be using one of these 11 by 14 stretch canvases and a few pieces of greenery that I have laying around to make a really pretty spring wall hanging. Now I only need the frame out of this stretched canvas, and there's a couple different ways you can do that. I have a staple remover, so I'm going around and just pulling up the staples so that I can remove that canvas material. But if you don't have a staple remover, you can just use a utility knife or an X-Acto knife and run it along the back side of the frame and cut the fabric away. Once all of the canvas material was removed from my frame, I'm just using a large chippy brush and I'm giving it a good coat of white chalk paint. Now because I like the distressed look, I didn't mind if a little bit of that wood peeked out here and there, but it's up to you, whatever your preference is. You don't even have to paint it. You could stain it or paint it a color that would fit with your decor. Even though I'm not using the canvas material that I removed from the frame, I did cut the excess off the edges, and that's what I'm using as my guide to how big I need to cut this turf mat. Now you can see there's a few lines on the back where the material is kind of woven and sewn together. So this made it easy. I just laid my template down and I cut up one side and then I cut it down to the height I needed to fit on the back side of my frame. And like I said, because this is a pretty flexible, grippy rubber-like material on the back, it's easy to cut through with scissors. I also wanted to show you that this mat does shed a bit as you're cutting it. So if you ever come to a spot where you can see some of the backing through the front, just take some of those pieces that came off as you were cutting, add a little hot glue and tap those down and it'll cover up that backing and you won't even be able to tell where it was. I'm using hot glue to attach my faux mat to the backside of my frame, but because it is so flexible, I wanted to stretch it as I glue it so that it was nice and tight. So I'm starting in the center of each side of the frame. I added just a bit of hot glue and then I held that in place with one of my craft clips. Once I had that dot on that side, I moved to the opposite side and I added another dot of hot glue to the center of that side's frame, and I pulled it nice and tight across so that there was no slack in it. And then I used another craft clip to hold that side in place as well. Then I moved to the long sides and I did the same thing. I added just a little bit of hot glue in the middle, added a craft clip, and then on the opposite side I added glue to the middle and made sure that I pulled it nice and tight to get all of the slack out of it, and added another craft clip. Once those four areas were nice and set with the hot glue, then I went through and added more on the corners just to make sure everything was nice and adhered down. After I had everything glued down and the hot glue had a chance to set, I took all my clips off and then I flipped it over, and anywhere that there was some grass hanging out from the front, I just used my scissors to trim off the excess. There's a lot of ways that you could decorate the front of this frame. I wanted to give you a couple options. I have this Easter egg cutout from the Dollar Tree that I thought would look nice in there if you wanted to paint it. And I also found this little bunny head, and I thought if you remove that from the other part of the sign, that would look cute in the center with some carrots. But I wanted to create a pretty spring wreath to put on the inside of mine, and I'm just using some scraps that I have laying around to do that. So I grabbed a piece of thin cardboard. I found a plate in my craft room. I usually use these for painting, and it fit well inside of the frame, so that's what I'm using on the cardboard as my template for my wreath base. I traced that out and cut it out with scissors, and then I found something smaller that would fit on the inside of that circle. I traced that out and then I cut that out as well, so I was just left with a ring of cardboard. I'm going to be adding some spring flowers to my wreath, so I wanted to make sure you couldn't see that cardboard through the flowers. I took a piece of green felt and I just hot glued my ring onto the felt. I cut around the edges, leaving about 3/4 of an inch all around the outside. And then I cut tabs into it so that I could fold those tabs over the edges and cover up that cardboard. I did the same thing on the inside. I just used my rotary cutter to cut it sort of pizza style so that I had little triangles on the inside. And then I just used some hot glue to fold those over. This doesn't have to be neat because most of it is going to be covered up with flowers. I just wanted to make sure that whatever color I put on the wreath base would blend in with the flowers that I'm using. And the flowers that I picked have a lot of leaves on them, so this way the green blended in with the green leaves. I had 2 bundles of flowers. One was a dark purple and one was a light purple. So I just cut each individual piece off of the stems. And then I'm just using some hot glue to layer it around the outside of the wreath. So you can see here, as I'm laying them down, you really can't see the ring much behind them. But just to be sure that it all blended together, that's why I used that green felt. Now, if you don't have felt in your stash, you could paint the cardboard as well. Just paint it a color that would match with whatever flowers you're choosing to use. To finish off my wall hanging, I just added some hot glue to the back side of my wreath, and then I stuck it in the center. I have a little side table, and I also have an electric fireplace in my living room, and I like to create hanging garlands to drape across the front of both of those. So I get really excited anytime there's a new season or holiday that I can create a new one for. I'm going to be using that turf mat and also some greenery, some pieces of greenery that I have on hand, some jute cord and some jute rope. And I'm going to use a few craft sticks, and I'll show you how those are going to help make the turf mat just a little more sturdy. You've already seen how easy it is to cut through this turf mat with scissors, but you can also use a rotary cutter too. Mine went right through with no issues. I have this really large ruler that's about 6 inches wide, so I laid that on my turf mat and I cut a piece that was 6 inches wide, and because this mat is 11.8 inches wide, it's close enough to 12, so we're going to call it 6 by 12. I want to create triangles out of this turf mat to act as hanging pennants for my garland. So on one side of the piece that I cut, I marked at every 4 inches. So I made a mark at 4 inches and then again at 8 inches. And on the opposite side, I started at 2 inches and I measured 4 inches from there. So I went 2 inches, 6 inches, and then 10 inches. And then using my rotary cutter again with my ruler, I'm just going to connect all of the dots. So starting in one corner, I'm going to line my ruler up with the corner and the first dot on the opposite side, and I'm running my rotary cutter to create that angle. Then from that dot I just cut 2. I'm going to use that as my guide and down to the dot on the opposite side and cut it on an angle. And this way you can see you get several triangles out of one piece of the turf mat just by connecting all the dots along both sides. Out of that one piece of 6 by 12, I was able to get 5 triangles, which was the perfect amount for what I needed. If you have a larger space that you want to create a garland for, just cut 2 pieces that are 6 by 12 and repeat that process. Now, like I said, I wanted to use these craft sticks to make these pieces a little more stable because you can see, because it comes in a roll, it tends to curl up on itself. So I just cut down my craft sticks into smaller pieces. I laid several on the back, and this just helps so that the craft mat stays nice and sturdy and it won't curl up on itself. You could add anything you'd like to the center of your triangle pieces. If you're ready to decorate for Easter, you could add some little bunnies or some Easter eggs, but I wanted to keep mine more geared towards spring. So I have a bunch of these floral picks in my craft room, and some of them are missing several that I've used in other projects. So I thought this would be a great way to use up some of those leftover pieces. I cut them off the stems, what I had left, and then I would gather up 2 or 3 of them into a little bundle. I used a piece of clear tape to hold the stems together, and then I just wrapped those stems with some jute cord so it didn't look like it had a raw edge. And then I used that same jute cord to tie a small bow that I could place at the base of it. So this kind of reminded me of when you see, towards the end of summer, whenever people are kind of cleaning out their gardens, if they have herbs, they usually bundle them up and hang them upside to dry. I thought that this looked really cute for each of my little triangle pendants. I did use some hot glue to glue my bundle down to the center of each of my triangles. And then I took a length of jute rope that I knew would fit across the front of my electric fireplace. I folded it in half, and at the center, that's where I placed my first triangle, using hot glue again just to glue it to the rope. And then I spaced the other triangles out from either side of that center one. Turf mat is also a great way to cover things to use as little shelf sitters or as centerpieces. I have this crate from the Dollar Tree. You can see I already painted on this one, so I'm reusing it for this project. I'm also going to be using one of these chalkboard tags and some of these little carrots that I got from the Dollar Tree. I want to show you the process that I go through whenever I have to cover up a box or a crate like this so that I can figure out what size piece of material I need. I start on one edge of the box and I measure from the top to the bottom, and then I go across the bottom of the box and then back up on the other side. And I write all of these measurements down because I don't trust myself to remember all of these measurements. So once I have those 3 measurements written down, I always add an extra 2 inches, and that's how wide I'll need this piece of material to be. Then I go on the opposite side that I was just at, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm measuring from the top to the bottom, and then across the bottom in the opposite way, and then back up on the other side. And like I said, again, I write all of these measurements down because there's no way that I'll remember all of those. I add those 3 measurements up, I add an extra 2 inches, and now I'll know that for my turf mat, my final measurement for this particular crate needs to be 11 3/4 by 9 3/4. I just wanted to share that with you because this applies whether you're using fabric or something like this turf mat. Now, to get the whole crate covered, I'm just centering it in the middle of the backside of the turf mat. I added some hot glue just to hold it in place. I didn't bother measuring it out. I just eyeballed it because I knew it just needed to be about in the center. Then I'm taking my scissors, and on the short side of my crate, I'm cutting directly up from the sides to the corner of my crate. So you can see I went right from the edge right up to the corner of the crate. That created a flap so that I'll be able to fold that up and over. I did that again on the opposite side. Again, this is the short side. I cut straight up from the sides to the corner. And now I'm going to remove the bulk from the corners of these. Now, because I'm using this turf mat, I want to cut the corner out completely because it is so thick and bulky. If you're going to be covering a crate or a box like this with fabric, rather than cutting the corners out completely when I'm doing fabric, I just tend to fold them in and then up and over because it gives it a more finished look. But because this turf mat is so thick and fluffy, I knew I could take those corners out completely. And because I added an extra 2 inches to both of my measurements, I have more material than I need to cover the crate, but that allows me to just fold those sides to the center of the crate. So you can see here, as I'm adding hot glue to my crate, I'm just lifting it up and pressing it into the mat until I have all 4 of those flaps pulled up and over my crate. And now I have about an extra inch of space going around the top, so I can add some hot glue to each of these flaps, and I can fold them into the center, and it makes a nice clean look on the top of the box. I did use some craft clips here just to make sure that these little flaps stayed in place, but that's why I said you didn't have to worry about getting it exactly in the center of the piece that you cut, because I knew I had that excess on the edges that I was going to fold in. So if it wasn't exactly centered, I just needed enough to get it folded up and over the top. And now I have a nice covered crate with that I can add anything that I want to it. And keep in mind, I'm just repurposing this crate. So if you don't have one of these on hand, you could use any type of small box. Even if it's not wood, it could be cardboard and it would work fine if you do the measurements like I showed you. Now I'm going to turn this into a little carrot basket. So I have some black and white striped ribbon. I'm just gluing that all around the center of my crate. And then I took that chalkboard tag and I wanted to write free carrots on it. it. Now, I've mentioned in my videos before, I'm not the best at hand lettering, but I thought I'd give it a shot because it seemed pretty simple. I used a white gel pen and it turned out okay. I think, I always rely on my Cricut for things like that because I'm not always a fan of my hand lettering, but you know what? It's crafting. Anything that's homemade is going to look cute, right? So once I had my chalkboard sign all written out, then I just added that to the front of my crate. And then those corner pieces that I had initially cut out from that turf mat, I added that to the inside just to add as filler because I already had them cut. So I figured, why throw them away? I'll just throw them in the inside. And then I stacked my little carrots on top of it. A quick and easy way to create a spring or Easter centerpiece is by using an old soup or vegetable can. I'm also going to be using some Easter ribbon and some Easter flowers and a little bunny pick that I already had in my craft room. You can see I already filled my can with some floral foam. Usually whenever I'm going to use floral foam, I like to fill whatever I'm going to be using first because it does get kind of messy when you're cutting it into pieces. So that way I can get all of the dust and pieces from the foam off of my work surface before I continue on. I had cut a piece of the turf mat down that was the same height as my soup can. It was a little bit longer, but as I glued it on, once I got to the other side, I just cut off some of the excess and used some hot glue to hold all of that in place. I cut a length of ribbon that would fit around my can, and then in the center of that ribbon, I just cinched it and tied it with a piece of jute cord. Then I used some hot glue and I glued that to my can. You can see where it's cinched in the middle. I thought maybe that would help the bunny stand out a little bit more because this is pretty wide ribbon. So I used some hot glue. I glued that to my can, and then on the back side, I just glued down the ends of the ribbons. Once I had one end glued into place, before I glued the second end down, I did fold the edge over so that it didn't have a raw edge from where I cut the ribbon. It gave it just a cleaner look. I added some hot glue to the back of my bunny head, and then I just placed that right over top where I had cinched that ribbon. Now the fun part begins. I can start adding in all of my little pieces to the centerpiece that I created. I had some of these fun glittery foam balls that I had got at the Dollar Tree a while back, and I just started placing those in with some of the leaves, and then I had a couple picks that had some glittery Easter eggs on them, and this centerpiece came together pretty quickly. I want to say I probably had the whole thing finished in less than 15 minutes, so this is a quick and easy craft that you can do, and this will make a great addition to my coffee bar. Anytime I'm using floral foam in something, I usually have to cover it up so that you can't see it through the flowers. So this turf mat is a great way to do that. I have a small galvanized bucket here. I think I got this from Hobby Lobby, but you could use any kind of container that you'd like. I'm also going to be using a succulent and some ribbon. You can see here I added some floral foam to my little bucket, and then I cut out a piece of this turf mat so that it was just a little bit bigger than my bucket. I used a Sharpie on the backside to trace out how big of a piece I would need, and then as I was cutting it out with my scissors, I made sure that I stayed just inside of that line so that it was the same size as the top of my bucket. I used some hot glue to glue down my turf mat to the top of my little bucket. And you can see this is a lot easier. Most of the time when I'm doing something like this, I like to use that reindeer moss or that green moss that you can get in a pack and cover up any floral foam, but it's so messy when you do that. It just seems to get everywhere, and it never fails when I use the moss like that. I always add too much hot glue and then I end up burning myself. So this turf mat makes it a lot easier. The last thing I wanted to do for my little spring centerpiece was to cover the bucket with some of this blue and white gingham ribbon that I had, and I tied a simple bow and hot glued that to the front. Now, because this turf mat is woven, it's pretty easy to stick flower picks and things down inside of it. So after I had my bucket decorated, I just took my succulent and I was able to poke that right through the turf mat into the floral foam. Now, also keep this project in mind because I know we're getting into the time of year when you may have a baby shower or a bridal shower that you're helping to plan, and this would make for a really quick and easy thing that you could add to the center of the table just to have a little extra decoration here and there. Thanks so much for coming to hang out with me again today. Let me know if you found this turf mat in your Dollar Tree and if you had any ideas of how you'd like to use it. All right, everyone, I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.